Thank you very much. I think I'm very lucky that I am following Shelley and he's not following me, because I'm confident he could rebut a lot of things in a way that I would remember forever. One thing, I had a chance to meet many of you either earlier today or here, and I appreciate all you do because there's an incredible collection of local officials here. And I like to tell the story that in the 1980s, when I was a local elected official, I was chair of the Regional Transportation Commission and had to appear at a State Transportation Commission meeting, and it was right after the chair of the San Francisco Bay Area Commission introduced 40 mayors, city managers, and representatives. And I stood up and said, I was a mayor, I was a chair of a transportation commission, I was a vice chair of the transit system, I was the vice president of the Council of Governments, and I was a county staffer, so I was our entire blue ribbon delegation. And I think I feel that same sense of home here in Ventura County, where people seem to know each other or work on lots of issues, that there's an amazing array of people that are dedicated to public service. And so I just want to thank you for that. And it's been enjoyable to be here today and to talk to you. Now, this is an issue that in many levels is very complex. But to try to explain it in the simplest way, and there's sort of a couple of key points. One is that the window opens about every 20 years for major progress or changes on water. And the window is open right now, and it is an opportunity that we have to take while we can. The status quo is horrible. Almost nobody benefits from it, and unless we rejuvenate a system and make plans for the next 50 years, we are really in trouble. And one of the issues that is another truism is that people are passionate about this issue in direct relation to their proximity to the Delta in Northern California. So they're very passionate there. And in many places in Southern California in the Central Valley, water comes from a tap. It's what you turn on and you hope to God it runs. And I think that it is really up to us to educate people as to the fact that there are decisions being made that are really going to matter for the next 50 years. And simply said, 25 million Californians get their water because it falls as snow in the Sierra. It goes into rivers in Northern California, chiefly the Sacramento and the San Joaquin, and then they form at the river delta just east of the San Francisco Bay. At the south of the delta, there are big pumps. They pump the water out of the delta into the aqueduct, and it goes across California. And at the time that the water project was first built in the 1960s, there was just this general view that water went to urban Southern California and the San Joaquin Valley. And over time, it has really expanded. It is in the broader reaches of Southern California, whether it's the Inland Empire as far as San Diego or here, but it is also in parts of northern Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County. The Silicon Valley, one of the economic engines of California, gets 50% of its water from the Delta, and in a time of a drought, that would be 80 or 90%. Even eastern Alameda County, the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area, gets their water from the Delta. And when the project was built in the 1960s, not a single modern environmental law was in place. There was no CEQA, there was no NIPA, there was no Endangered Species Act at the state or at the federal level. And so we have spent 40 years in court, retroactively fighting the fights that normally would have been fought at the outset of the construction and planning of a process, a project. And so now what we're trying to do is a project for the next 50 years. And we're trying to fix the problems that exist. And they are that in the Delta, major fish populations have crashed. The species are in danger. So this plan really has modeled 57 species and how we can bring them back and determine water reliability. Because the state legislature in 2009 said that in any project, what we want is we want two dual co-equal goals to be met. We want there to be ecosystem restoration in the Delta, and we want a determination of water reliability so that water that gets delivered across the state is not intermittent based on court suits or other things. And as I was saying to a group earlier today, I'm fond of saying that everybody is firmly committed to one of the two goals. And so our problem, and yet our opportunity is that you can't get the goal you want unless you satisfy the goal that is probably not your first choice. And so the way the water project has been set up has in part been part of the problem. The pumps at the South Delta, if they are turned on in any major strength, reverse the flows of a lot of streams in the Delta. The San Francisco Bay is salty. If there are lessened flows out of the Delta into the San Francisco Bay, salt comes in. It's not good for the farming there, it's not good for the fish, and it's certainly not good for the water quality of the water that is exported. And so our strategy is, on one level, to do tunnels that change the point of diversion and protect against some of those issues with flows that deal with the salt, flows in the right time for the fish, better water quality, and as was mentioned by Susan, resiliency in the face of an earthquake. Now, I had the misfortune to be a city leader in a town that lost 60% of the square footage in the core downtown to an earthquake. So I frequently have people say to me, they don't really happen. You're talking about something that's unrealistic, and I always want to say, welcome to my world. I was telling the mayor that as a city council, we met every day for 6 weeks after that earthquake happened. It was a tumultuous period of time. And the levees, you see, the thing that's happened in the Delta is that when Europeans arrived in California, the Delta was generally at sea level, and there were 500,000 acres of wetlands. There are 31,000 acres of wetlands now. It's overwhelmingly been converted to agriculture with levees built around what are called islands, but as the farming has gone on the last 100 years, they have subsided. So many of these so-called islands are 20 or 25 feet below sea level. And it's such that if there were massive levee failures, salt water would drain in like to a bathtub from the San Francisco Bay. Salt water over ag land behind levees is not good for agriculture, it's not good for water quality, it's not good for reliability of continuing to get water out of there. And these levees were built to hold the river back. They weren't built to seismic standards. They were built over the last 100 years to deal with agricultural and other protection. So that's the problem. And what we are trying to do is a habitat conservation plan that contains a new facility. And our idea is to make the current water reliable and restore the habitat at the same time. This is probably one of the largest habitat conservation plans in the United States, save maybe the Everglades. And the goal of it is also to have the water that comes out of the Delta now remain as a reliable supply. And so when it fits into Southern California, you're on one part, obviously, of Southern California. The major sources are the Colorado River, the Owens Valley, water from the Delta, wells and underground aquifers, and certain other regional sources, whether in some places there's recycling, desalting is coming in San Diego, various other things. And the significant thing that is not well known is in the greater Los Angeles area, in the last 25 years, 3 million people have been added to the population. on the same amount of water. So basically, there's been conservation and efficiency that has absorbed the growth, but it means that you lose the flexibility you have in conservation, and that you have to have what remains as a source be reliable. And in this area of Ventura County, it's basically state water. And so it means that we have to be reliable with state water. There was a very interesting year, and interesting is the way sometimes we talk about near tragedies. And I think it was 2006 or 2007. There was something like 25% of normal rainfall in the LA basin. The Colorado River was in the 8th year of drought. There were legal problems going on with the Owens Valley, and a judge turned off the pumps at the Delta for a number of days. If it hadn't been for 1.5 million acre feet that were stored underground and people's willingness to be efficient over the short term, I don't think Southern California could have made it through that period. And we have challenges coming. With climate change, I also, in one of the 25 agencies I had, I am chair of the Ocean Protection Council. And we have done science on what will happen with the seas off of California. And by 2050, we could have a 14-inch rise in the sea level. It could be substantially more by the turn of the century. My hometown of Santa Cruz was one of the 2 places that was hit hard by the Japanese tsunami. And that was with the tide out. That was at low tide before this happens, because it is not like a bathtub where it rises gradually. As I'm fond of saying, it's like the 2-year-old cannonballing into the bathtub. It is the extreme event, like a tsunami or something else. And so when you look at the Delta in terms of an earthquake or something else, if there is even rising pressures from the sea, that puts more pressure on a fix and reliability. And the thing about it is that while we are doing this as a core, trying to do a project in the Delta and try to deal with the Delta for the next 50 years, it is very important to wrap other things around it. More efficiency, recycling. There's some places in the state where if you could get water more efficiently, it could be used better, so the system needs to be upgraded. And there's an issue of storage, which is another word for dams. Because if you look at the really wet year that happened in 2010 and I think 2011, there was 800,000 acre feet of water above what was exported and what was needed for the environment in the Delta, and there was no storage. If we had had 800,000 acre feet of storage south of the Delta that was available, we could have taken that water. That's 400,000 acre feet a year for the last 2 years that are dry. That allows you to preserve the environment and have the required amount of water to export. So that is a very important piece of the puzzle. And when we eventually get to broader things, we will be talking about that. Now, I joked earlier at an event that I always wanted to work for someone that was fearless, that did what they thought was right, and was determined to get long-term solutions to seemingly intractable problems. And who knew it was going to be Jerry Brown? But it is. One by one, he's uprighted the budget, he's dealt with prisons, he's dealt with education funding, and he is determined, even if the solution changes in what it is, he knows that if we don't take action, and it was his father that established the water project originally, if we don't take action here, it is only going to go in a bad direction. And as part of the environmental impact work, we have a preferred alternative that is the one I've been talking about, but you do what you refer to as a no project alternative. What happens if you do nothing? And we might be paying a little extra in the bills to guarantee that we're going to have a reliable water supply for 50 years, even if it's not more, but the alternative is the water supply plunging by 1 or 2 million acre feet over the next decade or two in the Delta, and having to deal with what comes from that. And that is the challenge. And as a local elected official, I mean, I was a mayor in a drought in the mid-'80s, and the public did not understand why they were very successfully conserving water and having to pay more. They didn't get the concept of fixed costs, and we had to figure out how to establish a reserve that we gradually raised so that we could even it out whenever that happened in the future. And so that is one of the enigmas with this is, well, why do we have to pay a little more for not really getting more water? Because the alternative is getting substantially less. And so that is our challenge. And we are moving to the point that we expect to lock down a draft of the environmental impact report in the next few days and release it, because we're depending on the federal government, who we are working arm in arm with. This is a joint effort with the federal agencies and the state agencies. And there have been all these issues raised by the federal government on fish, and we are working hard in the project to address every one of them when it is released. But there will be a draft. There will be 120 days for comments. We will seriously address the comments, and then a decision will be made likely next summer or fall if we stay on target, and we will start to move on a project. And the project will take 15 years to construct. We have to have interim measures, but at the same time, we will start the restoration right away at 2,000 acres a year, so that if we start to bring back some of the species, it provides a greater comfort level under the permit to export the water. And we are trying to do this inside the project with biological goals and objectives, rather than having courts do it piecemeal as it moves along. So that's our goal right now. And I feel like it's, I was saying earlier, there are days when I feel like it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's the Rubik's Cube of public policy. You've got Delta counties. You've got people that have different kinds of water rights. There are different allocation systems in places. There are people that mix it with different water sources. But basically, if you have 5 million plus acre feet of water that we are trying to protect for the next 50 years, that is significant in the whole breadth of California. And so the thing I would ask is a couple of things, is that you continue to educate yourself, that you make sure that just because you don't live 300 miles to the north, you might actually be aware, make other people aware, comment, and make sure your interests are taken care of in this process. And it would not hurt for your legislators to hear from you. And I know when I was in the legislature, one of the most confounding things in the world would be my constituents thinking, oh, he's really good at that, I don't have to write him. And then my letters were running 100 to 1 against my own position, because nobody would write in. So it would be really nice that you would express yourself on this to your legislators and make sure that they are fully aware. And I think that we've really got a chance to do something significant. And I've personally taken over the negotiations with the Delta counties to try to do my best to meet some of their concerns. We have environmental NGOs we're meeting with. We're constantly working with our federal partners to keep them in the fold. And we're trying to meet all the statutory and science requirements as we move ahead. So that is why occasionally it's a bumpy road, but we've moved farther than anybody's moved in decades toward getting to a solution. And I just ask for your help in doing that.
Thank you for being here. I recently attended the Cal-AFCO conference in Northern California. There was a panel on the Bay Delta. All 3 speakers were in favor of the Bay Delta Accord. However, the audience, which is county supervisors and city council representatives and special district representatives throughout the state, particularly those in Northern California, had a very difficult time hearing about the Bay Delta plan. You mentioned that you were leading those negotiations. How are you going to bring harmony to this?
It's one of those things where how do you define bringing harmony? The thing about it is we're going to work to address the fundamental issues that people are raising. And part of the problem is I'm also fond of saying, is a lot of people locked themselves into the narrative about California water in 1982 when the peripheral canal was on the ballot. And it has not changed. No fact seems to have penetrated what happened then. I mean, there was an editorial in the San Jose Mercury News, to whom I am very close, where they referred to a project to do extra water just to excessively water Hollywood lawns. When they're in the Silicon Valley, they get 50% of their water from the Delta. The Silicon Valley economy depends on us being successful. So we have a real challenge in educating people. That is one that is ongoing, and we are working hard. And then the second piece behind your question is there is a myriad of interests. So that and the one thing about, for example, CSAC, the California Counties Association, is it's not done on population, it's done on geography. So I can speak to a room full of people where actually 80% of them represent about 10% of the state's population. And so that is always a challenge because they're different issues. 13 million Californians are not served by state water, so they particularly think that this doesn't interest them. And so in a water bond, we have to make sure there's, whenever we finally move to finalizing a water bond, that there's some kind of equality of benefit to all areas of the state, regardless of whether they're served by state water. And additionally, there are big issues in Northern California about the people who have water rights above the Delta. They are convinced that their water rights are going to be challenged by whatever we do. And it has been our assurance that that is not our intent. We intend to work on that, that if anything ever happens, it's with a willing seller in the Delta or above the Delta, but that we are not going to upset the fundamental underpinnings of those kind of issues around the state. And I think there's a peculiar thing going on right now. I'm sensing it in my negotiations with the Delta counties, which is, I don't know a polite way to say it, but it's that one of them even said it at the meeting. Well, if you're going to do this to us, and it's clear you're going to do it, then maybe it's time for us to figure out what we want. And so rather than me arguing with their formulation, it's what do you want? And let's start to see if that's something that we can resolve in this. So we are working on that, and it takes my experience as a local elected official to sometimes deal with it. I know when I was mayor, people would stand up and at public comment and say, you guys are idiots, you couldn't organize your way out of a paper bag. And my job at the end was to say, thank you very much. And we will continue to work in that spirit.
I think Bruce hit on one set of negotiations you have with external partners. As Secretary of Resources, you have a number of agencies, Department of Water Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife under your purview. It seems that those departments have different agendas, particularly Fish and Wildlife. What actions are you taking to bring everybody internal to your control to the table and have one agenda?
Perfect question. And it goes right back to the issue of dual co-equal goals. And in my agency, they are, one goal is represented by Fish and Wildlife, and another goal is represented by the Department of Water Resources. And interestingly enough, I would say the reason we are as far along as we have is that they have negotiated with each other very clearly and constructively on their interests. And for example, maybe a year ago, it looked like this thing was floundering. And there was a suggestion by the director of water that because there's so much scientific uncertainty, and if you launch down a project within scientific uncertainty, that sure doesn't help you with reliability or doesn't help you if you are committing money to a project, that we should have what is loosely called a decision tree, but it's really a roadmap for the life of the permit, that if this happens, we try to work it out this way. If this happens, we try to work it out this way, in a way that sort of holds those two interests together and never trumps one over another, but tries to meet their goals. And so that's what we're doing, and they have done really well. Our issue sometimes, to be honest, is the federal agencies. And so our negotiations have included, we have for all the way along, but intensely the last 6 months, I would say every 2 weeks, we have what we call a principals meeting with the 6 most major agencies at the state and federal level, and we take an issue and we try to work through it. And the federal fish agencies issued memos that were called the red flag memos. They said, here are the red flags where we don't think your project can meet these needs. And they have been working through each one of those to try to get to a permittable project in the construct of what we're doing. So we are working hard to work that out, and that is where the political leadership at the federal level has been really, really helpful. There's actually a letter that has gone out from the White House to cabinet level agencies saying they're committed to this project, and it is trying to, as long as I'm yapping, I'll tell you a story, because the first thing, Shelley can relate to it. The first day I walked into the resources thing, I was confronted with marine protected areas. And in the north, there's 28 recognized tribes that were left out of the whole process. And they had an argument that was hard to argue with, which was, for thousands of years, we were just fishing fine, and then you white people arrived, and now you don't want us to fish in certain areas. You know, you got to work this out. And so it took me 4 months, but I negotiated an agreement with the tribes that brought them into the fold on marine protection. And what happened is I would meet with attorneys and people, and we would end a negotiating session, and sometimes the tribes would come back to the next one, and they would start at the beginning of where we were in the last session. And it would make the attorneys and everybody psycho. And I would say, you do not understand what's going on here. We are not negotiating with the people that are in the room. They go back to their tribal elders and major tribe, and now they're coming back with the real direction. And even if we have to work it all the way through again, that's what we're doing. And I told the head of the National Fish and Wildlife Service that sometimes when I negotiated with his department, that was the same situation. Once he went back to the rank and file, they would come back and try to undo an agreement, and then we would have to work on it. But they are committed, and we are working it through. So I'm hoping we can get to a place that satisfies both.
Thank you, Secretary Laird, for being here tonight and for representing the interests of the people in this room. We've been very fortunate to get a lot of funding under the Integrated Regional Water Management Program from Prop 50 and Prop 84. As of the recommendations that came out this week, we were up to $56 million if we get everything we've requested in funding to develop reliable water supply projects at the local level, which I know the California Water Plan is depending upon for the future of the state. What is your feeling about water bonds that are currently being looked at the state level, either the Wolk bill or the work in the Assembly, to continue that funding that we desperately need in order to develop our own local reliable water supplies?
Well, I'm strongly committed to the integrated regional watershed process, and apropos once again of a Shelley story. I went to the launch of one in Santa Cruz when I was an Assembly member, and we had it on the river levee, and we were all speakers on one side and all the TV cameras were on the other, and I don't know what we were thinking. About 90 seconds into it, the first skateboarder came right through the middle of our press conference. And but it was really emblematic of the fact that it's lots of things combined to get to an outcome. There was an $11.1 billion bond that was put together in 2009 in the water package, but it was scheduled to go to the voters in the middle of the greatest economic downturn in modern times and wasn't doing very well. So it's been postponed. It's scheduled to be on the ballot in 2014. And that measure, while it's $11.1 billion and everybody agrees it'll have to be lowered to pass, even with the economy improving and the state budget improving, that measure had a significant amount of money in for integrated regional watershed management. And my argument internally is that when I was saying that everybody should feel like they're getting something somewhat equally, integrated regional planning money goes to the 13 million people that aren't on state water that feel like they're getting support for their regional things while things are going to other parts of the state. So I think there is a strong political argument for it. It's just a question of how much survives when a bond is reduced. And now each house of the legislature has come up with one. And I think there's two questions. Is 2014 the right thing, or do we go to 2016? And what remains when we reduce it? And the real thing is, I mean, Darrell Steinberg, the president of the Senate, who's the last major legislative leader who was on the water compromise, who's still there, suggests that you lower it equally by every line item so you don't undo the compromise. Others suggest there might be some things you throw out and leave major things in. That's the policy question that will be decided, and I suggest you really weigh in with your legislators so they know exactly how you feel on that.
What do you think is going to happen if the bond fails?
Well, sort of two observations. The first one is the water project, it stands on its own without the bond. So even though it'd be nice to have some of the things in it for wetlands and the other things, we would live to fight another day, and we'd do our best to move ahead with the water project. But if the bond itself failed on the larger thing, it really doesn't help us with some of the other things we need to wrap around this, whether it's storage, integrated watershed planning money, some money for conservancies to help protect the watersheds, other things, and we would need to come back to that at some point. We just couldn't let go of it, even if it meant scaling it down more to get it. So I think Susan said that's the last question. Thank you for having me. I appreciate having been here.